and welcome back. It is Monday. I am Mr. Sosotris, and today we are finishing up my spoiler-filled recap of the plot of Out of Oz. This is going to be the second half of the book. We did part 1 last week, and now we're going to finish the book. There is a lot in this second half, so this is going to be kind of a long video, but let's get right into this. Now, I've said this before, but these are spoiler-filled recaps, so this is for folks who have read the book already and want a recap of what goes on in the plot, or for people who don't want to read them but are curious to see what's going on in the story. And there is a cat playing with a toy in the background, so that's just, there's going to be crinkly noises. So, recap. The story so far, the Emerald City is invading Munchkinland. There's open war at this point. Things aren't going well. They're kind of in a bit of a stalemate. Rain, who's Elphaba's granddaughter, is back with her parents after being hidden away while they were evading the Emerald City forces. The Time Dragon clock has been destroyed, and the keeper of the clock, Mr. Boss, has retired, having handed the Grimoire off to Lear. So he's sort of not, he doesn't have anything to do with the Time Dragon clock or the Grimoire anymore. The Lion Burr has gone to help Dorothy Gale along with Mr. Boss and his wife, Little Daffy. Dorothy has returned to Oz and is being given kind of a show trial to bolster the Munchkins' nationalistic fervor. And so the lion feels like he needs to go and stand up for her somehow. All right, let's get into this. So we're at part 4, the judgment of Dorothy. So the lion, Mr. Boss, and Little Daffy are able to find the site of Dorothy's trial, presided over by Mombi, who's kind of a witch that we've heard of, but we haven't met yet. And it's a bit of a circus. This whole trial is really ridiculous. And this is actually probably the funniest section in the book. This is where Maguire really gets to show his comedic chops, because this feels like something out of like Alice in Wonderland. Just nonsense trial, bizarre evidence, and just nothing makes sense, and there's lots of kind of cutaway gags, and this is quite a funny scene. It's not super essential to the plot. It could have been done a lot shorter, but I like that Maguire kind of takes the time to really show how ridiculous and cartoonish this whole thing is. I really like this section, even though it doesn't really do a lot, but that's okay. So first off, one thing in this trial that caused a bit of a snag is no one can agree on time. So Dorothy at this point is 16. She was 10 years old when she first came to Oz, but in Oz, many more years have passed since she was there, and Elphaba died, and now we're here. So it's been like, in Oz, it's been like 16 years-ish, but Munchkinland follows a very weird calendar that has a lot of conditional dates that are added or taken away depending on what's going on. So it's difficult to kind of judge the time between when Dorothy first left and when she's back. The trial, it gets pretty nonsensical. The prosecutor insists that Dorothy is a criminal and set out to destroy Munchkinland by taking out the 2 witches who could have protected it against the Emerald City. Of course, Dorothy insists that she had no intention of killing anyone, and even when she went to the Wicked Witch of the West, she went there to apologize for crushing Nesseros. She didn't really go there specifically intending to kill her. They go over the events of Dorothy's time in Oz, and when she describes her home at one point, she talks about the ocean, which horrifies everyone because they have no concept of ocean. Oz is surrounded by desert on all sides, and just the concept of an ocean is so terrifying to people that there's people like throwing up just at the mere thought of something like an ocean existing. They ultimately find Dorothy guilty, of course, and set her up to be executed, but at that time, Mombi arrives to say that the Emerald City is launching another attack on Munchkinland from another direction. And to counter it, she's conscripting all animals in Munchkinland to fight in the army. So basically she's drafting them against their will. Burr included, because he happens to be there. So there's a bit of confusion at this point. So they're kind of rushing to execute Dorothy to get that over with. And Daffy, who's there, she gives Dorothy kind of a poppy-infused pastry, which sends her into a stupor. And so she's able to use that as an excuse to be like, I'm a doctor and I need to help this person so that you can execute her properly. And in the confusion, Burr takes Dorothy and they run away and they're able to kind of flee to safety. And so they're off, Dorothy's safe, all is good for that. Now we go back to Rain. So we're at part 5 now, and it's called At St. Proud's. So 2 years have passed since we last saw Rain. The family's living in a simple shelter kind of out of the way. Lear has hidden the broom and forbidden anyone from reading the Grimoire, so it's just kind of on a shelf with a blanket over it and no one talks about it. Rain is sort of a little bit obsessed with it. She fears its influence. She doesn't really want to read it, and that's the thing that keeps her from actually taking it. But it's kind of calling to her because it sort of recognizes that she is sort of the most powerful individual who can use it. We get a bit of a recap of events from Lear and Candle's past, including the full story of how they got a serpent who practiced sorcery to disguise Rain's green skin. We heard kind of a shorter version of this story before, but we get kind of the full story. They also take in a Scrow traveler at one point who stays with them. He seems kind enough and he helps them rebuild their house. But at one moment, when they're away, he ransacks the house and steals a few things, and he uncovers the Grimoire but doesn't take it. So they realize that he knows about it, and if he's ever captured or tells anyone about it, word of the Grimoire's location could get back to the people who want it. So Lear is really scared at this point. They also realize that anyone can make the association of Rain with the Grimoire because they are looking for her specifically. And so they decide to keep her away. So what they do is they have Nor hide her, and they make Nor promise never to tell them, Lear and Candle, never to tell them where she's hidden Rain. So Nor takes Rain away and takes her to this boarding school where she uses kind of the last of the money that she has that she took from her castle, and she pays for her tuition and says, she can stay here as long as she needs to, and I'll keep paying. Don't worry about it. So the people there, they sort of stick Rain in kind of an out-of-the-way, not really a dorm, but like an attic sort of room. And it's a little dreary and out of the way. It's very Charles Dickens. Rain sort of tries to get along with all the other kids, but she feels like a bit of an outsider. She struggles to hide details of her past and is having issues kind of settling in at the school because the people who are in charge are all kind of mean to her. They don't think she'll amount to anything because they think she's a sort of this poor ruffian with no schooling, and it's going to take her a lot longer to get caught up with everyone. But she does eventually sort of find a groove and sort of settles in a bit. Over time, the curriculum, she notices, changes, and there's a lot more propaganda surrounding the God Emperor Shell, who's in charge of the Emerald City at this point. There's a moment at a holiday dinner where she sort of embarrasses herself in front of a higher up, and so she's exiled to a so-called haunted dormitory that used to be used by the boys in the school, but they now use a different one. So she's there kind of by herself in this dark, gloomy place that's haunted. And she realizes why it's considered haunted. So she meets Tip, a homeless boy who comes searching for food. And this is the same Tip that Lear met in book 2. He was with an old woman. They were crossing the road kind of thing, and she offered to kind of sell Tip to him. So this is Tip, and he mentions that he's escaped from whoever he was with, and him and Rain sort of become friends. She sort of sneaks around and gets him food, and they, get to know each other, and they become really close. Eventually, Tip is able to sort of worm his way into the school itself and get hired as like a help boy. So at this point, the war with the Munchkins is very costly, and a lot of the male students at the school get drafted into the army, even though they're really young. And so there's no helpers or anything. And so Tip sort of hires himself out. He says he's an orphan, he has no family, and so he kind of works at the school alongside Rain, and they get closer. So Rain kind of is doing better at this point. She's doing fairly well at the school. She's learning. But she learns that there's some gossip going around that the Grimoire has been found by an enemy of some kind. So she doesn't know if that's the Emerald City or if that is Mombi, who's in charge of the Munchkin forces. So she's really scared because she thinks there wouldn't be rumors about this if it hadn't actually been found. So she and Tip sort of escape the school, they run away, and they flee towards Ko, which is the castle where Nor was from. It's where Elphaba kind of died, and that's where Lear and Candle sort of went after Rain was taken away from them. So she hopes to kind of go there and confirm that they're still there and to confirm that the Grimoire is safe. At this point, as they're traveling, Tip reveals that the old woman who kept him was Mombi, so the woman who's in charge of the Munchkinland forces, the witch, she was the one who kind of held him captive. And Rain also tells Tip who she is, her whole history, who she is, and everything. So their friendship at this point has kind of become something a little bit more than friendship. At this point, she's about 13, so guess where that's going. So now we're in part 6, God's Great Niece. So Rain and Tip reach Ko. Along the way, he tells stories of his time with Mombi, including a trip across the desert to the land of Ev. Rain is sort of shocked to hear that the sands can be crossed, because it's sort of known in Oz that the desert is deadly and no one can cross it and it's impossible. But Tip explains that you just have to kind of prepare properly, but you can cross the desert. So they eventually arrive at the castle and they find out that Nor has died and they're having a funeral for her. Burr is inconsolable with grief. Dorothy's there because after the lion and Dorothy escaped from Munchkinland, they met up with everyone there. And it's a very sad story. So they learn that Lear has been captured by a group of men dressed in black in the night. They don't know who they're working with. Candle had sort of begged Nor to tell her where she'd hidden Rain because she was sort of overwhelmed with grief. And she kind of kept asking. Nor, of course, refused because she promised not to tell them where Rain was hidden because she wanted to keep Rain safe. Nor eventually kind of goes mad with guilt. Her mental health sort of breaks. Candle at this point flees in search of Lear, leaving Nor behind. Nor slips into a really dark depression and she falls off a cliff. Now they're not sure if she jumped off the cliff or if she merely slipped and was distracted, but it was very, very tragic. So Dorothy and Burr and Mr. Boss are all still there, and Nanny as well is still there. She's still alive after all this time. So Rain tries to come up with a plan of rescue. No one is helping her. No one's giving her any helpful advice. She has kind of a weird dream where she uses Elphaba's crystal ball and sees Oz from above as if she's flying. And then she wakes up to learn that Tip has run away. He's gone off to Munchkinland to see if Lear is being held by Mombi. So he's returning to Mombi, who had kind of held him captive for years, and he's going to go see if he can either spy on her or find a way to manipulate things to free Lear if he's being cut there. So now we cut to Lear. He has been captured by Mombi's men. They've been torturing him on the journey to Munchkinland. They give him a potion that is going to temporarily disguise him as like a dead elephant, like a sentient elephant, so that they can sort of cross the border and no one will stop them because they think that they're just returning person who's fallen in the war. And so Kainat, the eagle, he was the Lord of the Eagles, and Lear knew him in the second book. He was the one who kind of had the Council of Birds, and they flew in the big formation of Elphaba. So Kainat sees this from above and assumes that Lear has died. So now we cut back to Rain. She decides to go looking for Lear in the Emerald City while Tip is in Munchkinland. She doesn't know who took her father, and whoever finds where he was taken can report back. So jump back to Lear. His body's brought to Mombi. She takes the Grimoire from him. After a while, he wakes up. Mombi says she can transform him back. She also reveals that she's the one who transformed Princess Nestoria. She was the Scrow Princess who was an elephant who was disguised as a human all those years ago. But all he has to do is kind of teach her how to read the Grimoire because she wants to use it. At this point, Trism shows up. Trism is the tortured soul that Lear fell in love with in the second book as they were fleeing all of their drama and tragedy. And Trism reveals that he's joined Mombi's side against the Emerald City. He reveals he was caught and tortured by General Cherrystone of the Emerald City forces, and he has been raising dragons again. So at the beginning of this book, remember there was one dragon that escaped the freezing spell that trapped all the other dragons in the ice. There's one dragon that escaped, and so Trism is able to find that dragon, and it turns out that they're able to lay eggs, and so he raises a new clutch of dragons for the Munchkin forces. So despite all of this that's happening, Lear is genuinely happy to have Trism back, despite everything, because they did have a genuine connection. So now we jump back to Rain. They run into the Osmists. Those are the ghosts that Burr encountered in the third book. They reveal that Noor doesn't have any unfinished business. So when she died, her soul didn't come to join them, so they can't speak to her. They also tell them that Osma, who was going to be the ruler of Oz, she was the child who was destined to rule Oz when the wizard first showed up. Everyone was talking about how she was probably dead, and they tell them that Osma isn't dead, so she's somewhere, but they need to figure out. And if she is, she would be like hundreds of years old at this point, but they do say that she's not dead. They also ask them about Elphaba, and they reveal that Elphaba's spirit, they didn't encounter her after death, but they do say that that doesn't mean that she didn't actually die. Throughout this book, there's this sort of ambiguity of sort of what happened to Elphaba. We do know from previous book that Elphaba's soul sort of was absorbed into the Grimoire, and so there's a part of her soul kind of in there. Whether it's the whole thing or part of it, we don't know. But there's, she didn't die traditionally, like she didn't die and her soul passed on. There's something, her soul is sort of trapped somewhere. So they're a little coy on that. Also, they tell Rain that she has a shell, and at one point she drops it and the end breaks off, so it has like a hole through it now. And so they say that if she blows on it, she can summon them. So they obviously know that there's something coming. So now we jump back to Lear. Tip at this point arrives back at Mombi's compound. He tells her, oh yeah, I got lost and all that kind of stuff, and she welcomes him back. But at this point she begins her campaign. She kind of encourages Lear to correct her reading of the spells, but it's clear he hasn't been cooperating with her at all. So we jump back to Rain. They reach the Emerald City, they get to the palace, they meet the Emperor. She has Dorothy with her, and so that's why she's sort of able to meet the Emperor. Shell is kind of a really strange man at this point. He's dressed in like rags, and he's sitting on a bucket and ranting about how he's, has his divine purpose and all that stuff. So he's really drank the Kool-Aid, so to speak. At this point, Dorothy stands up to him, and she has this amazing moment. I love it so much, and I'm going to read it to you because it's just the best monologue ever. So, okay. So at this point, Dorothy's been kind of odd. She sort of annoys people by singing, and she just seems sort of frustrated with everything, but she's sort of whatever. But at this point, she stands up to Shell and has this speech. So, he tells her that he has a headache and doesn't want to listen to her, but she says, "You'll have more than a headache when I get through. When I arrived first time, I came in a house that smashed your first sister. Before I left, I threw a bucket that splashed your second sister. Is it time for me to take care of you too? As I was preparing for my encore, I brought down a good deal of San Francisco with me. I arrived from heaven in a gilded elevator cage right down the side of a mountain. I'm getting pretty good at this. I can bring upon your holy kingdom an entire downtown district of hardy commercial buildings. Just try me." It's so good because we've got Dorothy, who's like this sweet little girl who's just kind of a little odd, and then she stands up to sort of this god emperor and has this speech. But anyways, so good. I love this. But as she's giving this speech, they hear thunder in the background, and it really sounds like it's very dramatic. And it turns out that the dragons that Trism's been raising are attacking the city, and it is brutal. So the city is like collapsing around them. So much of the damage is hurting kind of the everyday poor people on the street. And so Dorothy and Rain are kind of running through the devastation. They help people who are hurt along the way. There's a group of women who are like about to drown, and there's someone else that they're able to kind of protect. So they're doing their best, but it's just crazy. And so they're getting really desperate. So at this point, Rain pulls out her shell that she's had forever and blows on it to call the Osmas. And what they do is they sort of settle on the city and form sort of protective shields over part of it that cloak the people living under it. And so the dragons are focusing on things they can see. And so if they can't see something, they won't attack it. And so they focus on kind of the tall central building, so like the palace, and focus all their attack on that. But the Osmist shield sort of is able to shelter a lot of the people, the everyday people on the street. Eventually they sort of spread out and they cover more and more of the city, and so the dragons' attacks sort of lessen. They focus on just the areas that aren't covered. So we jump back to Burr, led by Tay, who's Rain's rice otter, and he went and found Burr and led him back to where Rain is. And so they decide to stay in the Emerald City to greet the Munchkinlanders when they arrive, because it's obvious that this dragon attack is sort of the prelude to a full-on invasion of the city. And so she assumes that when Mombi arrives to take over the city, she's going to have the Grimmery and Lear with her. Candle and Iskanary at this point also arrive. Iskanary is the goose that's been friends with Lear since the second book, and Rain is reunited with her, but again there's this sort of distance between them because Rain really hasn't been grown up with her parents, so she doesn't have a really close relationship with them. But Candle also tells Rain at this point that Lear is dead, because General Kynot, the eagle, told Candle that he saw Lear get poisoned and transformed. And so Rain is skeptical about this, but it's still a little, she's kind of, her faith is shaken a bit. So at this point, Mombi and the Munchkin army arrive and they take the city. So now we're at part 7, to call the lost forward. So the leaders of both armies convene to sign an armistice to end the war. It's clear that the Emerald City forces have been defeated. Rain is surprised to see Tip sort of alongside Mombi as she comes in. She's wondering where his allegiances lie. They do also bring Lear, who's unconscious again, to the Emerald City. As part of the armistice, Shell requested his nephew's remains. They don't know that Lear is still alive at this point. So while these negotiations are taking place, it's kind of long and drawn out. Tip and Rain are sort of reunited. They steal off to kind of a side room in the building that they're in, and they have an intimate moment, kind of their first moment like that. At the negotiations, Mombi reveals that Lear is not dead, but he has given up and been unable to shuck off his disguise through force of will. So she says that he can just, turn back into a human whenever he wants to, but he seems to have lost the will to continue on somehow. But she does say that if he doesn't change his mind, he's going to die as an elephant. So Shell makes restoring him a condition of his surrender. He says, "I will surrender if you restore Lear." So Mombi starts a ritual. Candle joins in. She has her dominion, that magical instrument that she plays, and they sort of do this sort of very complex ritual. And it's harder than she thought to take the disguise off. There seems to be something blocking her, or it's a bigger job than they originally thought. So they work on it, and Rain blows her shell, and it calls the Osmiths in again, because she thinks maybe they can help with the magic somehow. And it becomes sort of a more and more powerful spell. And a couple things happen. Tip next to her sort of convulses and falls over because they've come back and rejoined the fray, and Rain's skin starts to burn. So something is going on. So the spell does eventually restore Lear, but it also undoes 2 other spells. So Rain's skin is restored to its natural green, and Tip is transformed. So it seems that he has been the rightful ruler of Oz, Princess Osma, all along. So it turns out that when the wizard invaded, he made a deal with Mombi to transform Osma into a boy to sort of hide her away so she couldn't claim the throne of Oz, and then gave Tip to Mombi. So he's been a boy for a long time, and he's been sort of in Oz, or in Mombi's thrall. So the revelation that Osma is still alive and she's still a little girl, it halts the peace talks, and Osma is sort of, if given the opportunity to become the ruler of Oz, not Mombi, who is sort of thrown in prison, and it's implied that maybe she's quietly executed. So Rain and Osma at this point have kind of a bittersweet reunion as they realize that Osma's life will take her away from Rain. So because this is sort of, Rain's a teenager at this point, and she genuinely did love Tip, as teenagers are wont to do. And now that Tip has turned into Osma, she feels like they can't have that connection again, even though she's open to sort of staying with her. They're just, things have changed, and they're not in the same place, and there's too much awkwardness, and so it's the change of who Tip is that sort of makes it hard to get back together. So they part ways, and it's a little sad. So now we're into part 8, Somewhere. This is the final part of the book. So Osma sort of takes the role of the rulership of Oz conditionally. She sets up Burr as in kind of a regency role. He's like a throne minister kind of person. And then once Osma becomes of age, she can then decide if she wants to continue to rule or if she wants to sort of pass the throne on to someone else, because she's still a child at this point. She's I think like 11 or 12 at this point. Tip was a little bit older, but Osma is a little bit younger. So at this point, Rain visits Glinda and thanks her for kind of all her help. Glinda says that she's going to prison for arranging the attack on Shell's dragons, but knows that she will kind of eventually be pardoned. It's sort of like she isn't going to stay in prison forever, but she does need to sort of pay for what she did because she stood against the Emerald City. And with the peace really shaky at this point, it's more like it's something that they kind of have to do as a concession. So at this point, Rain uses the Grimoire to send Dorothy home, so Dorothy's gone. Candle and Lear break up at this point. It's very sad. It might not be forever, but Candle is sort of really distraught that she agreed to the decision to have Rain sent away so young, because basically she missed Rain's entire childhood, because Rain is now a teenager, and Rain doesn't really have a relationship with her parents that's any kind of like deep and meaningful, and Candle is really broken up about that. So she needs time on her own to sort of realize why she would make the decision that would basically like send her child away and not allow her to kind of grow up with her. It really breaks Candle's heart. And so they part ways. Lear buries the Grimoire, and he marks the place with Elphaba's broom, which sort of sprouts into a tree. The magical broom still has power, and the Grimoire below it sort of feeds its power into the thing. So the broom sort of becomes a broom tree that has other brooms hanging from it. Time passes, Lear settles into his new life. He takes up writing. He wants to write about kind of political treatises. Rain, however, still feels lost. She decides that there's nothing for her here, and there's no relationships that she has anymore that are really meaningful to her, and so she decides to sort of leave and find a new life somewhere else. Now, there's an interesting short vignette here where Glinda, who's in prison, has a moment where she thinks that Elphaba has come back to see her. It's not said explicitly. She kind of says the name, but they don't tell us what the name is. And so up until this point, there's been a few rumors that the spell that restored Osma has also restored Elphaba somehow. And so there's rumors going on that Elphaba has returned. And there's this moment, we don't see who opens the door, and it may just be that Glinda is so old at this point that she's sort of imagining things, and she's hoping that it's her friend Elphaba who's come back to see her. Other characters at this point have been talking about, people want Elphaba to be back because it's always nice to believe that there's sort of this savior that will come back and set everything right. But I don't actually think that Elphaba has come back. We do know that her soul is sort of a part of the Grimoire. Now, whether or not her soul was brought out of the Grimoire and she now exists as sort of a spirit, maybe. I don't think so, because there's stuff that'll happen in future books that sort of clarify this. But maybe it's just a vision, I don't know. But there's this brief little moment where we're sort of, the door handle turns and it cuts away before the door opens, and Glinda thinks that it's Elphaba who's come back to see her. So it's a cute little moment, but it's very ambiguous, and you're not really sure what happened. So Rain goes to the Tree of Brooms. She takes a broom off, she digs up the Grimoire, and she flies off out of Oz with the Grimoire. She crosses the desert. It's really difficult. At one point, she's sort of makes it about halfway, and it has to stop because it's so dry and hot, and she's running out of water. She meets Iscanary, who's been following her. Iscanary is the goose, and he says that he's going to come with her and make sure that she's okay. And so she flies off, and eventually she reaches the sea. Finally, the sea that everyone thought was mythical and that no one talked about, but she has this shell, this ocean shell, and so she's always been drawn to the ocean. And so she finds the sea finally. It's this awe-inspiring, gorgeous moment, and she flies off into the sunset over the ocean, eager to find out what she'll find on the other side. And that is the book. Now, this is the final book of the Wicked Years series, so this is kind of the first series. This is the end of it. So if you want to end there, you can. It's a good ending. Gregory Maguire did return back to this world, and he wrote another trilogy of books that continues the story following Rain, and they're pretty good. I'm going to keep doing those. It's called the Another Day trilogy. But that is the end of the Wicked Years series, and I don't know, I really like this book. I think some issues with this is that there is some pacing issues, because there's some sections that are very long and drawn out, and the plot doesn't really move, so it feels like the pacing is weird, because the pacing in the final section is just like this, like everything is happening and it's chaos and it's just nuts. But there are moments where even when nothing's happening, the vibes are really good. Like the whole trial with Dorothy is hilarious. It's like Muppet levels of humor. Like, it's so good. It's just chaos. And then also the sequence at the beginning with Glinda and Cherrystone, even though it is kind of a slow start to the story, the repartee between them is so good, and we get to see Glinda being sort of smart and kind of playing both sides. Glinda is a really interesting character throughout, because she's always been a bit of a, not collaborator, but she's been a bit of a wishy-washy figure. Elphaba always kind of stood up for the underdog and the animals and everything, and Glinda was always like, but the status quo, you know. And so she does little things to sort of help, but she does also benefit from the system and her position and the status quo. So she doesn't really fight against it a lot. And it's just, she's such a great character. And I love that we get to kind of see her as an old woman in this one, still really quick in the head. And she does sort of face consequences for what she's done. And she does deserve it. But we know that it's sort of, you know, she did some good in her life, and she, you know, ultimately kind of stands for the right things, because ultimately she does fight against the Emerald City forces when she destroys the dragons with Rain. So this is really great for Glinda. There's so much tragedy in this one. I'm so sad that poor sweet Trism, who's one of my favorite characters, I love him so much, and he just keeps getting tortured and traumatized and sad, and he needs a good life. By the end of this, Trism has sort of gone off. He's alive still, he's fine, but we don't really know kind of where he is or what's happened. So I love Trism, and the poor boy, even though he's like a grown-up at this point, he's like in his 40s, but you know, the poor boy needs a good day where he can just relax and not be constantly traumatized by everyone. Also, I really like Lear. I know some people find the second book, Son of a Witch, to be a bit slow and plodding. It's a very different pace than Wicked, but it really is a good character study, and I really like it. And I'm just seeing him as a character, all of the kind of awful decisions he's had to make, and the things that has happened to him, and he doesn't always make the right decision, but he's able to sort of find who he is and what he stands for, and is able to make decisions that are in line with that. And so by the end of the series, in this one, Lear has sort of found peace. And now he's lost things, and he, you know, no one sort of lives happily ever after in this series. There is no sort of perfect ending, but I think he gets the best ending that he can. He faces consequences for the things that he does, but he is also able to sort of come to terms with who he is as a person. And I really, really like his storyline. Lear and Rain and Elphaba and Glinda are probably just my favorite characters in this whole series. I also really like Nanny. She's sort of an awkward side character, and by this one, she's more just kind of a weird side character who doesn't do much. There is a scene near the end where Rain sort of talks to her, and she keeps talking about, like, as if she's Elphaba, so she thinks that she's Elphaba. And I think that's meant to sort of let us know that the rumors that Elphaba's returned are probably because people see Rain, and she has green skin, near the end, so that's where they think that that's happened. But I don't know. Ultimately, I think the series is good. It has its flaws. There's some things that don't quite work, and there's some decisions that McGuire makes about certain characters, especially in the books to come, that I don't really like. But overall, I think the plot and just the vibes of this series are so good. I like his sort of playful, darkly comedic way of writing, because all of the books have sort of a sense of humor to them, but it's a very dry, sort of droll humor. It's very English, and a lot of people don't pick up on that. I know a lot of people talk about how the first book is like disturbing and dark, and it's like, it is kind of dark, but there are also these moments of just like wit and just sort of dry bon mots and whatnot. I don't know. The way he plays with words, it's a little twee sometimes, but overall I think these are fun reads, and I do genuinely like the series. So that's all for this one. I'm going to be doing the next book, which is The Brides of Marakur, which is a good one. I really like that one. I might not do it next week. It'll probably be down the road a bit, but we are going to be continuing on with Rain's story, so don't worry, we will be seeing more of her. So with that said, I will let you go. I will see you next week, and in the meantime, happy reading. Bye!